started with a dog video, under a minute long, shot on a phone near a set of kennels on a Monday night in June. There's a dog in it. That's the whole scene. Except, in the background, if you listen, there are three voices, casual and relaxed. The sound of a family at the end of an ordinary day. Paul, Maggie, and Alex. That video was recorded at 8:44 p.m. in the evening on June 7th, 2021. By 8:49 p.m., Paul's phone had gone dark, and it never came back on.
911,
At 10:07 that same night, Alex Murdaugh called 911 to say he had just come home and found his wife and son shot near the kennels. And for nearly 2 years after that call, he told investigators he hadn't been at the kennels that night. The video said otherwise. But to understand why that video mattered, why a man with his resources, his connections, his entire life inside the legal system couldn't make an under-a-minute phone video disappear, and why it brought down a man who had operated freely for so long, you first have to understand where Alex Murdaugh came from, what his name meant in 5 counties of South Carolina, and how long it had meant it. The 14th Judicial Circuit of South Carolina covers 5 counties: Allendale, Colleton, Hampton, Beaufort, and Jasper, a flat stretch of land in the southeastern corner of the state, where the Spanish moss grows heavy and the same families have run the same institutions for longer than anyone thinks to question. People who grew up there had a name for it: Murdaugh Country. From 1920 to 2006, 86 consecutive years, a Murdaugh held the office of solicitor for that circuit, the person who decides which cases go forward, which charges get filed, which investigation goes somewhere, and which ones quietly don't. Randolph Murdaugh Sr. was first, then his son, Randolph Buster Murdaugh Jr., for 46 years, then Randolph Murdaugh III. 3 generations, 1 office, 86 years. And alongside that prosecutorial power, they built something. A private law firm named PMPED that became one of the most powerful and feared personal injury law firms in the American South. They sued railroads. They sued corporations. And when they could, they brought cases to Hampton County, no matter where the original incident occurred. Because in Hampton County, the Murdaugh name carried weight, and the juries had a way of ruling in their favor. The American Tort Reform Association ranked that district among the 3 worst in the nation for corporate defendants. The locals had their own name for the firm's building, the house that CSX built, named after the railroad company they had sued so many times. This is the world Richard Alexander Murdaugh was born into. Not just a family, an institution. That is the part you have to understand. Alex Murdaugh did not grow up outside the system trying to find a way in. He grew up inside it. Alex Murdaugh was not the heir apparent. That was his older brother Randy's role. Randy was expected to carry the name forward. Alex was the second son, the charming one, the gregarious one, the man who worked every room he entered and made everyone feel like they'd known him longer than they had. He became a personal injury attorney at the family firm. He built cases. He won settlements. He cultivated the image of a man who fought for the ordinary person against the powerful. He married Margaret Kennedy, Maggie, in 1999. She was warm, genuinely liked and remembered by almost everyone who knew her as kind. They had 2 sons, Buster and Paul. The family had a place called Moselle, a 1,770 acres property in Islandton, South Carolina, complete with dog kennels, hunting stands, dove fields. The kind of property that only exists because money has been accumulating for a very long time. From the outside, the picture was exactly what it appeared to be: the name, the firm, the estate, the wife, the sons. And inside that estate, for more than 20 years, a woman named Gloria Satterfield came to work. Gloria was their housekeeper. She was a mother, a working woman. The kind of presence that families rely on so completely they stop noticing. The person who knows where everything is, who was there when the children were small, who has spent more time inside a house than most of the people who own it. By the account of people who knew the family well, including attorneys who later represented her sons in court, she had become one of those trusted, long-standing presences that a household becomes genuinely dependent on over the years. Remember her, because what Alex Murdaugh would eventually do to Gloria Satterfield is the clearest window we have into who he actually was. And the question is, if a man can do what he did to the woman who helped raise his children, what were the actual limits of what he was capable of? In February 2018, Gloria, at 57 years old, fell on the front steps of the Moselle estate. She died. Her death was not treated as suspicious. No autopsy was ever performed. Later investigations found that coroner offices in 2 separate counties had no record of her death on file. A 57-year-old woman died from head trauma at the bottom of a flight of steps, and the machinery that exists to ask questions simply didn't turn on. Then Alex Murdaugh called her sons. He told them to sue him for Gloria's wrongful death, that he had insurance, and this was how they would protect their future, he said. And he offered to help them find the right attorney. The attorney he recommended was Corey Fleming, Alex's former college roommate and the godfather of his son Paul. The insurance company settled, and the payout was over $4 million. Gloria's sons received nothing. The $4.3 million had been funneled through a fraudulent account Murdaugh had named Forge, chosen because there was a real company called Forge Consulting that manages settlement funds. The money moved into accounts he controlled. He later admitted in a signed legal document to stealing $4.5 million from the Satterfield estate alone. Corey Fleming, the friend, the godfather, the attorney Gloria's sons were told to trust, eventually pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges for his role in it. Gloria's sons came to Alex Murdaugh in grief, trusting him completely. He had attended their mother's funeral. He had pointed them toward the man he called a close friend. And while the settlement processed, while her sons waited, he was spending that money on oxycodone, between $40,000 and $60,000 a week on pills, by his own later admission. A habit running 20 years deep. The woman who had worked in his home for over 2 decades was in the ground. Her sons had nothing, and no one had caught it. No one had looked. Because in Murdaugh Country, the law wore a face that people recognized. And that face was at the right funerals, weeping the right tears at exactly the right times. On February 24th, 2019, a group of 6 young people, all underage, all drinking, boarded the Murdaugh family's boat on a waterway near Paris Island, South Carolina. Paul Murdaugh, Alex's 19-year-old youngest son, was at the wheel. Earlier that night, Paul had used his older brother Buster's ID at a convenience store to buy beer and whiskey. Witnesses described him celebrating as he left the store with surveillance footage showing him walking out holding the beer above his head. The night began on the family's private river property. Then, they docked at a party on the river. Then, just after midnight, they were headed back. According to later court depositions, Paul was driving aggressively, doing donuts on the water. When others begged him to stop, he refused. In her deposition, Paul's then-girlfriend Morgan Dowdy said she got into an argument with Paul because she wouldn't take his side. She said he slapped her, spit on her, and then went back to the wheel. One of the passengers on the boat that night was 19-year-old Mallory Beach. She had told people she was scared. And approximately 2:20 in the morning, the boat struck a piling of the Archers Creek Bridge. Mallory Beach was thrown into the water. Everyone else survived, but she didn't. Mallory's body was found 8 days later, nearly 5 miles downriver. Hours after the crash, Paul's blood alcohol level tested at 0.24, 3 times the legal limit. At the scene, While Mallory was still somewhere in that water, a deputy noticed Paul Murdaugh walking toward the group, smiling. Mallory's boyfriend, Anthony Cook, tried to get to Paul but was held back. He then identified Paul to the deputy as the person who had been driving the boat, and the deputy testified about what Anthony Cook said in that moment. "You all know Alex Murdaugh? That's his son. Good luck." Two words that told you everything you needed to know about what it meant to be a Murdaugh in those 5 counties. A 19-year-old is in the water, and the witness to it knows and has known his entire life that the name attached to that smile means the rules do not apply. Good luck. But the horror of that night was not only the crash, it was what happened after the crash, when the name Murdaugh entered the hospital. According to reports, the hospital staff observed Alex Murdaugh going from room to room, attempting to speak with the survivors. A security guard reported overhearing him on the phone saying, "She's gone, don't worry." According to Anthony Cook's cousin Connor Cook deposition testimony, he was treated at the hospital for a broken jaw and was told by Alex Murdaugh that he didn't need to tell anyone who had been driving. Paul Murdaugh attended Mallory's funeral. He stood right at her grave. For weeks, Mallory's aunt, Lynn Rivas, who had spoken to her niece just before that final boat ride, said she held herself together, waiting for an arrest she wasn't sure would ever come. "We just didn't think we'd see that day," she said. When the arrest finally came, it fell on what would have been Mallory's 20th birthday, which was nearly 2 months after the crash. Paul was charged with 3 felony counts of boating under the influence, causing death. He was never handcuffed. When an officer came forward for the arrest, the cuffs were reportedly waved away, and his booking photograph shows him in his own street clothes. A year later, he received a speeding ticket while towing a boat. Still free, still driving, still the son of Alex Murdaugh in Murdaugh Country. But while the town focused on the boy who drove the boat, a much quieter trap was closing around his father. A civil lawsuit was building. The criminal case could threaten Paul, but the wrongful death claim filed by the Beach family, that could threaten Alex, because this lawsuit could reach the one room he could not afford to open: the money. The wrongful death civil lawsuit filed by the Beach family had one demand that no criminal investigation had ever successfully made of a Murdaugh. It wanted his personal financial records. Attorney Mark Tinsley, representing the Beach family, wanted to see everything: the accounts, the settlements, the money moving in and out. Everything the Murdaugh name had always kept private. Alex Murdaugh fought that request for 2 years. A hearing to compel the disclosure was eventually scheduled. The date? June 10, 2021, 3 days after Maggie and Paul were murdered. At trial, prosecutors argued that the approaching moment, the hearing where everything hidden would be forced into the light, was part of what drove what happened at Moselle on the night of June 7th, because behind those financial records was something almost no one outside the firm had seen. According to the South Carolina Attorney General's office, approximately $9.3 million was stolen from at least 90 people over the course of a decade. The way it worked was quiet and precise. Murdaugh directed firm employees to make settlement checks payable to Palmetto State Bank. Those checks were delivered to Russell Lafitte, the bank's chief executive officer, who deposited them into accounts Murdaugh controlled, rather than accounts of the people the money belonged to, his clients. And the people whose money it was were not corporations. They included a quadriplegic crash victim named Hakeem Pinkney, who had his settlement trust emptied; orphaned children from a car wreck, whose trust funds Murdaugh had been appointed to protect, quietly drained; the sons of Gloria Satterfield, people who had already suffered. The same man who stood in courtrooms and argued for the vulnerable had been systematically taking their money the moment the cases settled. On the morning of the 7th of June, 2021, the day Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were killed, the PMPED firm's chief financial officer, Gene Seckinger, discovered nearly $800,000 in missing legal fees and confronted Alex directly. He gave her no answers. That same evening, Alex Murdaugh drove to Moselle. 3 days before the hearing. 3 days. And what happened there, what the Kennel video eventually proved, is the heart of everything that followed. On Monday evening of the 7th of June 2021, at the Moselle around 8:44 p.m., Paul Murdaugh used his phone to film a short video under a minute. It seemed completely ordinary, just a dog video near the kennels with nothing out of the ordinary. Except, in the background of that video, Paul's voice, Maggie's voice, and Alex's voice were clearly audible. The Kennel video placed all three of them together at that location and at that time. At 8:49 p.m., Paul's phone went dark with no more activity ever. By approximately 9:06 p.m., vehicle telemetry analyzed by an FBI electronics expert at the trial showed Alex's Suburban had been taken out of park at Moselle and was heading toward his mother's home. At 10:07 p.m., Alex Murdaugh called 911. He told the dispatcher he had just arrived home and found his wife and son near the kennels. Maggie Murdaugh had been shot 5 times with a .300 blackout rifle as she ran. Paul was shot twice with a shotgun, with the second shot at close range, and was catastrophic. Prosecutors argued at trial that 2 different weapons were used deliberately to suggest multiple shooters, and as prosecutors put it at the trial, family weapons were used to commit this crime. The murder weapons were never found. Alex Murdaugh had called 911 to report finding bodies. The Kennel video showed he had been standing with those bodies while they were alive, fewer than 20 minutes before his car left the property. But the 911 call was not the only performance that night. For the next 2 years, Alex maintained an even longer one. For months after the murders, Alex maintained a consistent story that he had not been at the kennels that night. He said he had been at the main house and he had visited his ailing mother that night. He said he just came home and found them. He appeared at their vigil, the funeral. He gave interviews. He wept. He moved through the public stages of grief with the ease of a man who had spent his entire life understanding how he appeared to other people. This performance went on for nearly 2 years. Then, in February 2023, Alex Murdaugh took the witness stand in his own murder trial, and he admitted the truth. He admitted he had been at the kennels that night with Paul and Maggie, exactly where the video placed him. He had lied to investigators repeatedly. His reason? He was ashamed. He said he knew being there would make him look guilty. The defense made the accurate point that no murder weapons had been recovered, that no blood evidence definitively placed Alex as the shooter, that there were no witnesses. A man can lie and still not be a murderer, they argued. But the state's argument to the jury was simpler. They did not need to prove Alex Murdaugh was a good man or a bad man. They needed to prove he was there, he lied about being there, and the timeline between that video and his car leaving Moselle left no room for anyone else. The jury heard both arguments and they deliberated for less than 3 hours. But before we get to that courtroom, we have to talk about what Alex Murdaugh did in September 2001. Because even with a murder investigation circling his property, he still had one more lie left to stage. 3 months after the murders, on September 3rd, 2021, Alex Murdaugh's partners at the family's law firm confronted him with evidence of his financial crimes and forced his resignation. The very next day, September 4th, he called police to report that a stranger had approached him on a rural road while he was changing a tire and shot him in the head. He survived because the bullet grazed his skull. At first, it sounded like another attack, another shadow around the Murdaugh name. Then 10 days later, he told investigators the truth, because investigation led them to Curtis Eddie Smith. He had called Smith, a former client, an alleged drug dealer, and asked Smith to shoot him in the head. The idea was that Alex would die and for it to look like murder and not suicide. That way his surviving son Buster could collect on a $10 million life insurance policy. Smith fired. The shot grazed him. Then Alex drove himself to the hospital. That was the official explanation. But even that explanation never sat cleanly, because if the plan was death, why did it end with one grazing shot? Why did Curtis Smith leave? Why did Alex survive, drive himself away, and tell a story about a stranger? There is no clean answer to that moment, not one that makes the story feel normal. Maybe the plan panicked. Maybe the first shot changed everything. Maybe Curtis Smith never intended to finish it. Maybe the whole thing was less of a plan than another desperate performance from a man who had spent his life believing he could still control the room. What matters is this: even when Alex Murdaugh told the truth still felt like another version of a lie. His stated reason for all of it: he claimed a roughly 20-year addiction to oxycodone had clouded his judgment. Pills he claimed he'd been buying from Curtis Smith. Smith was arrested. In interviews about the case given to CBS News, Smith's defense attorney explained why his client had simply left the scene, why he hadn't called anyone. He said Smith did not report it because in those 5 counties, Alex Murdaugh's name was the institution itself. You don't report something to the system when the system had a face you recognized. And if that was true for a man on the street, what had it meant for every victim, every witness, every grieving family that had ever crossed the Murdaugh name across 100 years? The trial of State of South Carolina versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh began January 25, 2023 in Walterboro. People lined up before dawn outside the Colleton County Courthouse. The man who had spent his whole life inside courtrooms walked into one from the wrong side. The man who had inherited a legal dynasty, now standing inside a courtroom, not as an attorney, not as a family friend of the prosecution, but as the defendant. The prosecution built its case around what the digital evidence showed: a man placed at the scene by his own son's phone, a timeline that couldn't be explained any other way, and a financial motive that the investigation had already proven he was capable of acting on. The defense pointed to what the state didn't have: no murder weapons, no blood evidence definitively connecting Alex to the shooting, no witnesses. A man who lies is not automatically a man who kills. On the 23rd of February 2023, Alex Murdaugh took the witness stand. He admitted the Kennel lie. He admitted the financial crimes. He wept and denied killing Maggie and Paul. On March 2, 2023, after deliberating for less than 3 hours, the jury returned. Alex Murdaugh was found guilty on both counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He described the crimes as unfathomable. Sitting in the gallery of the courtroom were Mallory Beach's family and the families of clients whose settlement money had never arrived. People who had spent years in a place called Murdaugh Country, wondering if this day would ever come. But the story, as it tends to do when power is involved, didn't end there. The official responsible for managing the jury during the trial, Becky Hill, who also was the clerk of court for Colleton County, became the subject of an allegation within months of the verdict. The defense claimed she had been communicating with jurors during deliberations and was pushing them toward a guilty verdict. Several jurors later gave statements that Hill had told them to watch Murdaugh's body language and not to be fooled by the defense. The suggested motive? She was writing a book about the trial called Behind the Doors of Justice. A hearing was held in January 2024. The presiding judge found Hill not completely credible and described her as publicity-seeking, but ruled the defense had not proven Hill's conduct had actually changed the jury's verdict, so the conviction stood. Then, in May 2025, Becky Hill was arrested on felony charges. Among the specific findings was that she had shown sealed court exhibits, including graphic crime scene photographs, to journalists and then lied about it under oath. On December 8, 2025, Becky Hill pleaded guilty to 4 charges, which includes obstruction of justice and perjury related to the sealed exhibits, and 2 counts of misconduct in office for using her public position to promote her book. The Murdaugh defense took that to the South Carolina Supreme Court. The defense argued that even one juror being improperly influenced is enough to require a new trial. The state countered that Hill's conduct was never proven to have reached any jury member or changed a single vote. On May 13, 2026, the South Carolina Supreme Court finally issued its ruling. The decision was unanimous, 5-0. Alex Murdaugh's murder convictions were overturned and a new trial was ordered. The Supreme Court identified 2 failures at the heart of the original trial. The first was Becky Hill. The justices used the phrase, "shocking jury interference." They found she had urged jurors to watch Murdaugh's body language closely. She suggested his testimony couldn't be trusted and pressured them toward a quick verdict. The second failure was the financial crimes testimony. The court ruled the trial had allowed the prosecution to go far too long and far too deep into evidence of who Alex Murdaugh was as a person, evidence that told the jury who he was before they were ever asked to decide what he did. The South Carolina Attorney General announced his intention to retry Murdaugh for the murders of Maggie and Paul. But Murdaugh was not released. He remains in custody, serving a 40-year federal sentence for the financial crimes, the stolen settlements, the drained trust funds, the money taken from people who had already lost enough. The murder convictions are gone, and as of this recording, the retrial has not yet happened. By now, this story looks like a story about a failed verdict. But look at what is underneath it. The system that protected the Murdaugh name for 86 years, that bent around every investigation, that let case after case go quietly without justice. That same system now undid the one moment it had finally turned on him. Not because he was innocent, but because the machinery around the trial was broken. Here is what this story is actually about. Not one bad man, not one night on a hunting property. This is a story about what happens when an institution built over generations, embedded in every layer of a region's justice system, stops being able to see itself clearly. When power becomes so normalized that the people inside it don't feel powerful, they feel normal. They feel like this is just how things work. There is a version of Alex Murdaugh that his world knew for decades. The man in the courthouse, the handshake at the door, the attorney who took your case and made you feel like the system was on your side, the name that opened every room. That version worked on nearly everyone for a very long time. What sits harder than any verdict, what doesn't resolve the way justice is supposed to resolve, is this. The financial crimes didn't stop after the 7th of June 2021. Court records established that Murdaugh continued misappropriating client funds in the period following the murders, even as investigators entered his world. Even as the machinery that had always served him began turning the other way, he kept taking. Not because the money served any purpose anymore, but because a lifetime of operating without consequence had made the habit so deep, so quiet inside him, that even the death of his own family could not interrupt it. The question that followed this case everywhere it went, in courtrooms, in comment sections, between people who had never set foot in South Carolina, was never really about him. It was, how many families operate this way and never get caught? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, because this case wasn't discovered because the system worked. It was discovered because a civil attorney wouldn't drop a financial records request. Because a dead young man's phone had a video on it that couldn't be unrecorded. Because a woman died on a set of steps, and 3 years later, a completely separate investigation happened to pass close enough to notice. The Murdaugh name controlled 5 counties for 86 years. The name is still there. The roads are still there. The retrial is coming. And somewhere in that flat, quiet heat, and in every corner of every place where a name carries more weight than a law. The question this story leaves behind is still not about one man. The scariest thing about power is not what it does when it fails. It's how long it works.